So now we're going to build our first jQuery plugin, and it turns out to be easier than you might think. So in the lesson, and here on this slide, it shows what the steps are in building particularly a jQuery collections plugin, right? So this is one of those methods that attaches to the end of a jQuery selector. When you're selecting a set of elements from the page and you get back a jQuery object that contains them all, and then you can attach a method call to that. Well, whoa, that's what we're going to do. We're going to build one of these method calls. And the steps are here, and we're going to walk through them one at a time. The thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a highlighter. And what the highlighter is going to do is, well, let me actually show what the usage of this thing might look like before we start to build it. What I want to do is this. I want to be able to make a selection of elements on a page using any of the jQuery selectors that work, and then just tag on this highlight method, which is going to make them, let's say, background color yellow, right? As if somebody used a highlight marker on it. And I want it to happen to whatever I select on a page. So this is going to be the usage of our jQuery plugin. Now you can see here I've got some plain JavaScript, and let me just uncomment this comment mark so you can see it, syntax highlighted. This is the code actually we used in our bookmarklet when we had the bookmarklet that added URLs to all the links on a page. And I'm showing it simply because, oops, let me bring that back up again. I'm showing it simply so that you can see the kind of manual method that you could use to traverse a whole bunch of things on a page and change each one of them in some way. In this case, I'm using getElements by tag name, which is pretty limited because I can only do it with tag names. And what we're going to do with jQuery is going to be kind of the same sort of thing where we're changing something about each element that we match on the page, but it can be any kind of match that you can create in jQuery. So let's get right into it. Now, the thing that we're going to set up here in terms of adding a jQuery plugin, this doesn't actually have to be done inside a document.ready because it doesn't matter if the document's ready. As long as jQuery is loaded, then we can do this. It could live inside the document.ready, but I'm going to put it out here. And what we're going to do is follow this first step, right? So if I go back to my slides, the very first thing, well, this is just basically what I just talked about, so we will skip past that one, is we add a function to the jQuery property fn, right? So jQuery has a property called fn, which essentially is the prototype of the jQuery function, right? So we've looked at prototypes and we understand how you can write properties, methods and properties to an object prototype, which then become available to any object of that type. And that's what we're doing. By writing to fn and adding properties to it, we're going to be modifying the prototype of jQuery. And what we're going to do is we're going to name it, right? Our property is called highlight, and it is a function that basically does this. In fact, let me just grab this right from here and go to our text editor and pop that in. Whoops, what just happened? We didn't get the whole thing. Let's copy that and put it in here. So now we have a function called highlight added to jQuery's prototype, and what it does is for every matched element, and each matched element is going to be represented by this inside this method, right, is we're going to set it CSS, we're going to set the background color to yellow. And this is it. When jQuery makes a selection, it's going to call this method on every matched element. So each matched element is going to have its CSS property set, background color yellow. Let's save that. Let's go to the web page where we're loading this. And this is a web page I've lifted from last year's course, but I'm using it because it's got a lot of links and things on it. And I'm going to hit the reload. And sure enough, all of our links have now been highlighted in yellow. And that's kind of it, right? At its most basic, we've now created a new jQuery method that highlights things. If I were to select something different here, oh, hey, let's do header. We've seen this selector before. And I reload, now I get the headers highlighted, right? So it's as easy as that, and it's as cool as that. Now, as it turns out, we haven't done all the steps. This is not considered a very well-behaved jQuery plugin. Let's see why. What if I then say on top of highlight I want to chain on another CSS, and I want it to be color, red. Let's say I want to just change the text. It's some other jQuery thing I want to add on, because of course you can change jQuery calls. When I come back here and reload this, it didn't work. I probably didn't throw an error. Oh, actually it did. It said cannot read property, CSS, of undefined. Well, why did it do that? It did that because this function doesn't return anything. So if I try to chain on to the end of what the function returns, that's undefined. And we can see that here, right? Oh, I could have made it italic. I could have done any sort of thing that I want to tag onto the end of it. In order to preserve the chaining of jQuery plugin, what you want to do is return the jQuery object itself so that other functions, other methods can be called on it. So the way you do that, very simply, every jQuery, every well-behaved jQuery method, or selector method in any case, returns a jQuery object. And we want to make sure, so this CSS background color yellow is a jQuery call. It is returning a jQuery object, and we want to make sure that our function returns that object as well. So by doing this, and you know what, I'm going to go ahead and set, what did we do here? I said font style italic. Let me use that in our code here. Let's make it font style italic. Now that I've added this return statement, this should actually work. Let's move this down and reload the page, and now all my links are italic. So chaining is now working just the way we want it to, because we have returned the jQuery object. Now, the one other thing that we need to do in order to play nice is make sure that nothing we put in this code block gets exposed to the global scope. And the second thing that we want to do is we want to make sure that this is going to play nice with the circumstance in which somebody uses the jQuery no conflict, right? So we know that jQuery, the word jQuery, and the $sign are equivalent in jQuery, so that we can use either one of these syntaxes to call on jQuery. But if somebody uses no conflict, it releases the $sign to other libraries, and in fact, this thing right here would break immediately if we said jQuery no conflict. Let's do it. jQuery no conflict. If I do that, this thing no longer works, right? Because we've released the $sign. But we might want to use the $sign within our plugin. We could have had other stuff going on in here, and we could use the jQuery word everywhere. But there's sort of a more polite way to do this. Now, the first thing would be, and we can see this on the slide, the first thing would be to wrap the whole thing inside a self-invoking function. So let's do that as the starting point. And this will preserve this will limit things so that nothing's in the global scope, right? So we create this expression which has a function in it, and then we call it, right? So here is our self-invoking function that's protecting all of this from the global scope. If I come back to here, we can see the plugin still works. The one other thing that we can do, and it's noted on this slide, is we can take that jQuery word, the jQuery object that's called jQuery, and that word is always available to us, and we can pass it into our self-invoking function. And inside the self-invoking function, the parameter name is $sign, which means our code in here that uses the $sign will continue to work, even if somebody says jQuery no conflict, because this $sign is scoped to within this function. Now, if this seems like a little bit of magic, in a way, it sort of is. And, you know, as you do this and work with it, eventually it kind of sinks in and you realize, oh, okay, I see what it's doing. If it seems confusing now, that's okay. All you really have to know is to do it. If you pass the jQuery object into the self-invoking function as a parameter, inside the self-invoking function, you call that parameter $sign. So all your code inside your function setup and whatever you do in here, you can just use the $sign at will without worrying about what somebody using your library does with no conflict if they're using some other library. So that's about all there is to creating a well-behaved jQuery plugin. It returns itself, so it can be chained. It doesn't expose anything to the global scope, and it preserves the use of the no conflict when somebody happens to be using that. So we have done the first 3 of these steps to having a good jQuery selector plugin. Now we're going to look at these other 2 in a minute and see how we can make this thing even better.